So you're giving gun rights back. They can apply for gun rights after 5 years in Ukraine. It's better than 3. At one point, it was 3 years because we were trying to get Republican votes. 5 years seems reasonable, but the way this works is I gotta get permission, so I don't have a problem with it at all. I mean, the thing is, we're gonna sign it, we like it.
I have to say, though, it's kind of chicken shit for us to go forward with all these years, and then all of a sudden, when we get an opportunity to pass the bill, the government
Chicken shit.
Yeah.
Poop shit, pig shit,
No.
chicken. I've asked. I don't see a problem with it. It's got circulated. We didn't have a problem with it. Whether or not, let me get an official position, so that way we can support the bill.
It undermines it if we don't have the support of the government. It undermines
Well, but as you know, we started out with the 8 bills, and that's been all of our focus and concentration.
So now they're all in one place.
7 of them are. We're trying to get an 8th out today.
Which is the 8th?
Salt weapons. That's why everybody's here today. Yeah, they're not here to oppose your bill.
Yes, they are.
They are?
Sure.
What's the matter with your bill?
Because they don't ever want anybody to keep guns out of their hands. Everybody.
Oh, this is because it increases the number of crimes.
The Committee on Public it will now come to order. We're going to stand at ease. Is it up? Public Safety Committee will now come to order. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for being here, those in the audience and those that are watching live stream. Working, and so we're good underway. And so I'll turn to our Vice Chair of the committee, Chair of the Firearms Subcommittee, Delegate Bourne.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One bill on our uncontested docket, that is HB 1499, proposed by yours truly. HB 1499 establishes the Virginia Gun Violence Intervention and Prevention Fund, which shall be administered by the Department of Criminal Justice Services for purposes of supporting gun violence intervention, prevention programs, including community street outreach, hospital-based violence intervention, and group violence intervention programs. Subcommittee recommends reporting 8-0, and I would so move.
All right, thank you, Delegate Bourne. Any questions from committee members? All right, we got a motion. Please vote on the electronic voting board. Clerk will close the roll. Bill reports 18-3. Delegate Bourne.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. HB 264, related to concealed handgun permits, removes the option for the concealed handgun permit applicants to demonstrate their competence by completing an electronic video or online course. The bill does not affect any in-person means of satisfying that requirement. There was a substitute that the committee recommended adopting. That substitute I would move, and quite simply that substitute just removes all references to the National Rifle Association and proof of the demonstrated compensation provisions. Subcommittee recommends reporting with a substitute 5-3, and I would so move.
All right, got a motion for the substitute. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Substitutes before us. In motion, Delegate Davis.
Speaking to the substitute, if I may.
You're recognized.
Thank you. Just for the full committee to understand, I know everyone kind of read the bill before they got here, and this is the bill that gets rid of all the online classes, but it also goes a step further, and I believe, Mr. Chairman, if I'm correct, that this takes out the concept of NRA certification instructors. So many other parts of our code actually name entities that we trust to do certain things. We've always trusted the NRA to supply certification to our first responders and so many of our other firearm instructors on the Commonwealth. And just so everyone here understands, we're taking that out so you can almost get certification by just about anyone that deems themselves an instructor at this point, if I remember the bill correctly with the substitute, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, just to sort of add on to or correct any misconception, again, the bill does not limit or expand any ability of anyone to get a concealed handgun permit. This bill simply requires that in person, all firearm instruction cases and classes still need to be conducted by a state-certified firearms instructor. This substitute simply removes any identification of any one single entity to provide that. And again, I would renew my motion to report this bill as with a substitute.
I'm going to turn to the patron, Delegate Lopez. Did you want to?
No,
Any
Mr.
remarks?
Chairman, I wanted to just raise the state certified aspect of it, in fact, and also the fact that naming a specific private entity in the state code was not normal for the state code, so that's why we took it out.
That is a practice we're trying to avoid. Delegate Ferris, you are recognized.
Mr. Chairman, on the amendment that I have here in front of me that we're considering, on line 34, it says Firearms Training School utilizing instructors certified by the National Rifle Association or the Department of Criminal Justice Services. Is there any other, if someone has been certified by the National Rifle Association, is there an enactment clause that will allow them to go to the Department of Criminal Justice Services and get the ability to instruct if they are already, and I think there probably is a lot of them that are already certified by the National Rifle Association and are not certified by the Department of Criminal Justice? Is there an enactment clause that would allow them to make that change?
Delegate, I guess that question was directed at the patron, Delegate Lopez.
I would actually ask the state Department, DCJS, if they're, I mean, I believe already that if you are NRA certified, that you have to be state certified as well. But the fact is that, it's not that difficult to get state certification to go through this process. So we didn't think the enactment clause was necessary at this time.
Delegate Wilt, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question for the patron. Just at the heart of the legislation, is there a particular problem that the delegates trying to solve with in regards to the online training courses? Was there something that happened that proved that that was insufficient?
Delegate Lopez.
Mr. Chairman, yes, the absurdity of actually being able to take an online quiz over and over and over and over and over again until you pass it, it being marketed as something that can be done within an hour without actually ever proving that you've used or have any competency with a handgun. So yes, the idea that you can look at a video or a DVD or an online program and say that this is sufficient and that you can take a quiz, a 10-question quiz over and over and over again with questions like, what is a magazine? Is it a periodical? Is it a clip that goes into a gun? Come on. It's just...
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Wilt.
So, in other words, no, to answer my question, which I didn't hear, there's no problem. There's no incident. There's nothing that's happened that proved that the online training is insufficient.
Thank you, Delegate Wilt. Delegate Ferris, you recognize.
Mr. Chairman, could maybe somebody from DG follow up on my previous question, somebody from the Department of Criminal Justice or my friend the Secretary answer that question?
Delegate Ferris, we don't have anyone here that can answer the question as an answer to your question. Delegate Davis, you recognize. One last time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question for the patron of the bill. I understand in Virginia right now that anyone can carry open without going through any of the issue or the process of getting a concealed carry. The ability to concealed carry allows them to, at that point, carry that firearm in their purse, in their backpack, or honestly just to have their jacket draped over the firearm when it's carried around the waist. The question is there any other skills or laws or anything that someone really needs to know that they wouldn't already have or need to understand just to carry open that they need to know just when their jacket drapes over their firearm or when they decide to put it in their purse for safety?
Mr. Chairman?
Delegate Lopez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is specifically dealing with concealed carry permits. This is not dealing with open carry. It's dealing with what I think is an absurdity in the code, and we're only narrowly focused on the issue of concealed carry.
Delegate Helmer, you recognize.
Mr. Chair, speaking to the bill, it has been talked about whether excluding certain organizations from here is going to provide a problem for obtaining training, but the bill itself provides for the courts to acknowledge and recognize training no matter what. Also speaking to the ideal of training for concealed carry versus open carry, I'm sure that many members of this committee would be very open to proposals that suggest the need for adequate handling of firearms training for open carry as well.
Delegate Rush, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Speaking to the bill.
You're recognized.
I think it's absurd that as we continue to grow our economy with technology, and you're able to take online courses such as nursing, physical therapy, police science, that we now, in this age of digital technology, are taking away an ability for someone to take an online course. Just this week, we added JMU to the Online Virginia Authority, which I serve on, which we're trying to get underserved communities online education so they can finish their degrees. And I think this is just a step back. And I mean, its purpose is clear, is to limit people to having concealed weapons permits and not what the delegate said.
Thank you, Delegate Rush. Delegate Bourne, you have the last word.
Move the pending question.
Mr. Chairman. Motion. There's a motion to report. Do I have a second? Second. We have a motion and a second. Please vote on the electronic voting board. Clerk will close the roll. Bill reports with a substitute 12-9. Delegate Bourne.
Mr. Chair, next bill is House Bill, a very, very fine bill, House Bill 600, patroned by the Chair, Delegate Hope, regarding family day homes and storage of firearms. This requires that during the hours of operation of a family day home, all firearms shall be stored, unloaded in a locked container, compartment, or cabinet, and that ammunition be stored in a separate locked container or cabinet. The subcommittee recommended reporting 6-2, and I would so move.
Any questions from the members on this bill that many have seen before? All right, got a motion. Second, properly second. Please vote on the electronic voting board. Clerk will close the roll. Bill reports 12-9. Delegate Bourne.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. House Bill 1288, patroned by Delegate Murphy, is related to the purchase, possession, or transportation of firearms following 2 or more misdemeanor convictions for assault and battery of a family or household member. This prohibits a person who has been convicted of 2 or more misdemeanor assault and battery of a family member or household member from purchasing, possessing, or transporting a firearm. Any person who violates this provision shall be guilty of a Class 1 misdemeanor. This bill also provides for a process by which a person convicted of such crimes may petition the court for reinstatement of his or her right to possess or transport a firearm. There was a substitute which incorporated House Bill 78, 900, and 459. Those also added prohibitions of those folks who have been convicted of stalking, sexual battery, assault and battery of a family or household member, simple assault when a person intentionally selects that person against whom simple assault is committed because of his race, religion, conviction, color, or national origin. Again, the subcommittee recommended reporting with a substitute 5-3, and I would so move.
Move the substitute.
So move.
Second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Substitutes before us. Recommend reporting.
Mr. Chairman,
we've
speaking to the bill.
got Delegate Davis. You are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, just for the rest of the committee's edification, this bill we have to be very careful of. I know misdemeanor assault and battery sounds really bad, but when you look at Virginia law, we use the common law definition of assault and battery. So unlike the federal government where domestic assault and battery, if you're convicted of, you automatically lose your right to own a firearm. And that is something where you have physical force that is applied at the definition at the federal level. At the state level, that's not required. If we look at the definition in Wood versus the Commonwealth, it's not necessary that the touching result in injury to the victim's corporal person. It's sufficient if it does injury to the victim's mind or the victim's feeling. And in Lynch versus the Commonwealth, it goes on to say that even the slightest touching of another or his clothes or cane or anything else attached to his person, if done in a rude, insolent, or angry manner, constitutes battery for which the law affords redress. The problem, Mr. Chairman, is in subcommittee, I shared the situation a couple years ago where a 13-year-old threw a baby carrot at a teacher and got charged with assault and battery. this literally, and I know it sounds extreme, but it's not extreme at all, given that it will be the law, but if you end up throwing a piece of food at a family member, you can be convicted of assault and battery of a family member in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and therefore lose your rights to own a firearm for 2 years because of essentially a family food fight. So, Mr. Chairman, I just want everyone to understand that when violence is involved, we all agree up here, but I don't believe violence is defined as a food fight, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Delegate Davis. We got a conviction we're talking about here. Delegate Helmer, you're recognized.
Mr. Chair, I'd offer, speaking to the bill, I'd offer that the solution in Virginia to preventing gun violence, which is so often involved in domestic murders, so often involved in dealing with folks who, victims of domestic violence. This is intended to protect them. And if the delegate has issues with the definition of assault and battery in Virginia, I'd be very welcome to changing them, but protecting the ability of those who've been convicted of assault and battery of a family member to retain the firearms that they can use to do harm is not the way we should move in this Commonwealth. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Helmer. Delegate Robinson, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, my concern with this bill is that it deals with a whole lot of things that, as an eye doctor, and I don't see very many attorneys on this particular committee, is that my concern is these are big deal things that I think courts would be better to handle as far as and in concept, I agree with this. I think that we shouldn't allow people who do true assault to family members and loved ones and whoever. I don't think we should allow them to have the possession of a weapon. But I don't think I'm in a position to make a decision on this without this bill actually going to courts.
Thank you, Delegate Robinson. Delegate Bourne, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As was noted by Delegate Davis, we had extensive conversation about the enumerated violations of Virginia law. And just to his specific example, I think my understanding would be that they'd already be convicted and addressed in federal law. In addition, nothing in this bill removes a judge's ability to assess, analyze, based on the facts of the case, and determine the appropriate punishment and or disposition of that case. In addition, Mr. Chair, I would just point out for those who were not in subcommittee that we had it suggested that many of these crimes, including sexual battery, were minor crimes. And I would submit that anybody that thinks sexual battery is a minor crime ought not be in possession of a firearm. And so I would, again, renew my motion to recommend reporting this substitute.
Got a motion and a second properly before us. Please vote on your electronic voting board. Clerk will close the roll. Bill reports 11-9 with one abstention. Thank you, Delegate Bjorn. Thank you for that good work of the subcommittee. Delegate Levine, report from the Subcommittee on Public Safety. You are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We had one bill report in subcommittee. It was House Bill 1648, Delegate Corey's bill. It's a bill dealing with the treatment of prisoners known to be pregnant in our correctional facilities. There was a substitute with an amendment, and I would move that at this time.
So moved. Properly second. All in favor say aye. Opposed? All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The subcommittee recommended reporting the bill with a substitute by a vote of 7-1, and I so move.
Any member wish to speak on House Bill 1648? We've got a motion and properly second to report House Bill 1648. Members, please cast your votes. Clerk will close the roll. Bill reports 19-2 with substitute. Thank you, Delegate Levine. Thank you for your fine work on the subcommittee. All right, so before we get into the couple bills that are on the agenda, I'd like to explain the ground rules for today's hearing. As I've stated before, the committee has a long tradition of civility, being courteous and being respectful of one another. And this goes back with the chairman, Delegate Wright, before him, Delegate Lingenfelter, and Delegate Bev Sherwood, who I remember serving with way back when. And while we have different views on a wide range of topics, this committee has always maintained a level of decorum and respect and civil discourse for one another. Secondly, I would ask everyone out of respect to please use your request to speak button. When you have questions, I will recognize you in the order in which you asked to be recognized. Because we have quite a few people here, I want to make sure that we allow sufficient and equal time to hear from the public. I also want to make sure that we have enough time to allow questions from the members. So specifically for each of the bills, here's what I will allow. I'll allow 4 minutes for the patron to present their bill to the committee, 5 minutes to those who wish to speak in favor of the bill, 5 minutes for those who wish to speak in opposition to the bill, and then we'll have 5 minutes for the committee members to ask questions. And of course, you know my demeanor by now. I'm pretty much a pushover, and so I'll be very lenient on these things, particularly when we're going down manners that involve further exploration. But we want to be fair to everyone, so we will have a time clock on all these matters. For the audience, I want to thank you for being here. I know many of you traveled long distances, and I want to thank you for coming. We take your views very, very seriously. Your input is always welcome, and it's always important. And so thank you so much for being here, your right to petition the government. We do not allow chanting, singing, or shouting because that will be disruptive to the business of the committee. I noticed that there are some signs in the audience. I asked you to keep your signs low so that you don't disruptive of views for the people behind you. Many groups organize on Capitol Square, and that is a more appropriate place for demonstrations. And so I would ask you, if you feel the need to demonstrate, to take that outside. Viewpoints should be made at the podium in an orderly fashion. We ask that you identify yourself and state whether you represent any particular group before addressing the chairman of this committee, and ask that you adhere to the time limits. And we have a time clock right here on the right. If there aren't any questions from committee members, we'll call the first bill, and I don't see any questions in the queue. House Bill 961, Delegate Levine, if you would go to the front of the podium to present the bill, we will recognize you for 4 minutes. And Delegate Levine, I understand you have a substitute.
I do. I'd like to move that substitute.
And if I can allow us to pass that around. Okay, why don't you go ahead and explain your substitute, Delegate Levine, and then we'll get in the posture where we'll adopt it. But why don't you walk through your substitute and the difference between the underlying bill and the bill that's before us. Delegate Levine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I would note briefly the underlying purpose of HB 961. The purpose of this bill is to limit the incidence of mass murder. In the last 40 years in the United States, 5 out of 6 mass murders have been conducted with assault weapons. And during the federal assault weapons ban, that number was reduced by approximately 70%. We have listened to gun owners, responsible gun owners across Virginia, and I want to thank them for contacting me. I also want to thank very much the governor and his staff and Secretary Brian Moran for working very hard to find a compromise that protects the rights of responsible gun owners and still limits the assault weapons that have been involved in so many mass murders. The heart of the differences between this bill and the other is that this substitute is less restrictive than the original bill. It allows every gun owner in Virginia who lawfully possesses a weapon to keep that weapon. No one has to give up a weapon. What it does do, though, is it prevents sales, purchases, and restricts various transfers of these assault weapons. It also bans bump stocks, known in the bill as trigger activators, the kind of thing that makes a semi-automatic weapon act more like an automatic weapon. And also, it restricts large capacity magazines. That's the heart of what the bill does. I'm happy to answer any questions of the committee.
Thank you, Delegate Levine. So let me go ahead and ask at this time for those that support the bill to form a line. You have 5 minutes.
Mr.
Oh,
Chairman,
let's go ahead and move the substitute. Properly second. All in favor, say aye. All right, opposed? All right, substitute is before us. Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Secretary.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Brian Moran, Secretary of Public Safety and Homeland Security. We have been asked why do we continue to pursue this piece of legislation, particularly after you all have acted favorably on 7 of the governor's gun prevention legislation. I'll tell you why, at least I'll attempt to, is, you know, during July when the governor called for a reconvened session, the Roanoke Times wrote an editorial that said, you know, rather than passing new laws, why don't you review the recommendations made after the Virginia Tech massacre? I thought that was actually a good idea. And so we went back, we reviewed it, and a lot of the recommendations had to do with behavioral health. So Secretary Kerry and I conducted an exhaustive review. Turns out the legislature and the Kane administration at that time actually implemented almost all of the recommendations, with one glaring omission, and that is Delegate Plum's universal background check, which you will remedy this year. But, you know, in reading that report, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I also read the facts of that case. And they're horrifying. You know, as Cho stalked the halls of Norris Hall that morning, he came to, you know, shooting. He had 2 pistols, one of which was a high-capacity magazine. He came to one door, and he couldn't gain access because the professor was on the other side of that door with his shoulder preventing access, allowing some of his students literally to jump out the window to survive. And he ultimately got through that door and continued shooting. And all I could think about is, what if he had to reload? What if he had to take the time? Seconds, maybe nanoseconds. A student, when seconds mattered, they could escape through that window. Reloading that magazine mattered. That's why we're here. Just like those students, just like the theater goers in Aurora, just like the school children in Newtown, the concert goers, the nightclub goers in Orlando, Florida. Time and again, this is too often. These are weapons of war, not my words, the court's words. 4 circuits have taken up this bill. Assault weapons are not protected by the Second Amendment because they're weapons of war, and that is, again, the court's words, not mine. They're not protected by the Second Amendment, just like machine guns before them. The court will uphold this legislation. You just need to pass it. I ask you to pass it.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Welcome.
Mr. Chairman, Andrew Goddard, Virginia Center for Public Safety. It's not about what these things look like. It's not about their features. It's about the combination of what they can do and the damage that they can cause. These are not your average handguns. These are guns that can cause injury without the bullet actually touching the part of the body that they're going to destroy. You can put a 9mm bullet into somebody's liver. In most of the places in the liver, the person is going to survive if they get to the hospital fast enough. If you put an AR-15 round into a person's liver, it becomes, as someone described, like a jello mold dropped on the floor. There's no place for that in civilian life. There's no need for that in civilian life. My son probably wouldn't be alive today if he'd been shot with an AR-15 rather than with a 9mm. I ask you to pass this. While they do have uses that would probably fine in the hands of certain people, we don't have a system in place to ensure that they are only in the hands of those good people. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
My name is Christian Heine. I'm the Vice President of Policy over at Brady, and we are in strong support of this bill. What we are talking about with this legislation is increased lethality. These guns are fundamentally different. The features of these guns are fundamentally different. When we talk about a barrel shroud or a forward grip, this is a design and a feature of the gun that is literally allows somebody to shoot round after round after round after round without burning the flesh off of the palms of their hand. When we talk about a pistol grip, it's so that we're preventing muzzle creeps, that we can continue to fire round after round after round without having to reload. These weapons are accomplish and do and are designed to do exactly what we see over and over again. It's why they are chosen in nearly every single major mass casualty shooting that we see in this country, because they're very effective at doing exactly what they do. They are designed, and these features are designed for the battlefield. They're designed to shoot out a lot of lead in a short period of time, in a small space, and to really do a lot of damage. And that is why they're chosen. That's why we continue to see them. Please do what's right here. Please pass this legislation. If you do so, you will save lives. Thank you.
Let's add one more minute to the clock, and I want you to briefly say, we'll try to get through everyone, say who you're with and your support for the bill.
Thank you. My name is Martina Lyons, and I'm representing the grassroots of the Brady chapters in Virginia. Thank you so much to this body for the very important work you've done this session. We're very, very grateful. This bill in particular, thank you so much, Delegate Levine. This is a life-saving bill. Our children and our grandchildren have been terrorized with having to do firearms, rapid shooter drills in the schools. This is not the way our children should be raised. It should not have to happen. We are alone in industrialized countries in allowing weapons of war on our streets. These weapons were never intended for a civilian market, and every single one of you know that.
Thank you. We have a line behind you, so I appreciate
I urge you all to vote in favor of this bill. It will save lives, and it's what we sent you to Richmond to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am, really quickly.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Jessica Samuels. I'm here from the Attorney General's office. Attorney General Mark Herring supports this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Really fast.
Good morning, Lori House with the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence. I know too much about these weapons. I've spoken to the mother personally, up close, of one of the 6-year-olds who was killed at Sandy Hook. My daughter was a victim at Virginia Tech. She survived, thank God. You don't want to know what I know from Noah's mother. Don't let it happen again.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am, really quick.
I'm Juliana Bachman from Springfield, Virginia, and I support the bill.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, everyone here that didn't get a chance to speak, can you raise your hand if you support this bill? Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. All right, those who wish to speak in opposition to the bill, please line up. I will. I said at the outset. That we need to kind of quiet down and not be disruptive. Why don't you go ahead and put 6 minutes on there, and so we'll go ahead and get started. Yes, sir. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is DJ Spiker with the National Rifle Association. This is the bill, right? This is the one that's fired up Virginians across the country, that has led to an outcry that your offices have heard for the last 2 months and continued. And your colleagues don't want this bill on both sides, the majority, the minority, the other chamber. Nobody wants this bill. The Secretary Moran spoke very passionately about Virginia Tech. And you will understand by his comments that this bill has nothing to do with assault weapons, because Virginia Tech was taken by handguns, an extended magazine. This is the bill that will make millions of Virginians felons overnight. Possession of a magazine over 12 rounds, an arbitrary number. There is not another state in the country that says 12. There are states that say 10. There are states that say 20. Nobody says 12, so they'll default down to 10. Any person who has a commonly owned sporting rifle, a handgun, in my case, a Beretta 92 FS, 15 rounds. I'm a felon. My wife is a felon for owning a similar handgun. We're felons overnight because of this legislation. This is the bill you're hearing about. This is the bill that your constituents are talking to you about. This is the bill that you are here and you're hearing from us. We strongly oppose this bill. This bill will not make Virginians safer. 11 murders with long rifles in 2018. And unfortunate tragedies, Virginia Tech and Virginia Beach, both of those tragedies were the handguns. But by this bill, you wouldn't know that because handguns are certainly not included. It targets the dark, scary weapons. Delegate Lena's town hall made it very, very passionate and mimicking of what a scary weapon looks like. This bill does not make anybody safer. This bill will not make Virginians safer. What this bill does is make Virginians, law-abiding Virginians, felons overnight. We strongly oppose this bill.
Thank you. Thank you, and welcome back to Virginia as one of Virginia's state senators. We miss you. Thank you for being here.
Oh, you don't miss me on this bill. I honest to goodness, when I left Congress a year and 8 or 10 months ago, or however long it was, I announced I was leaving. I hoped that I'd never stand up at a dais like this again. I don't believe in hitting people from behind, so I want to make this really, 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 really clear to everybody on this dais. I don't know how this thing got out of DLS without a jacket on it, even in its amended form. Even in its amended form. Let me tell you why. The federal courts in Heller said that you could not ban from possession of citizens weapons in common usage. The word ubiquitous describes to a T the AR-15 rifle platform, the single most common center fire semi-automatic sporting rifle in the United States, number one. It describes to a T the Glock 19, which holds 15 rounds plus one in the chamber at 16, which would make the possession of one of these, after, as I understand the rewrite, after January 1st, 2021, a felony. And so I'm not going to pound the podium. I'm just going to say that you need to make sure you allocate the money in the budget for the lawsuit that's coming. And I want you to hear today, because I like to wish sometimes that I had a crystal ball, that this legislation may very well be the bill that goes before the new Supreme Court of the United States as currently comprised, as the needle begins to tick back in a particular direction, wherein any and all weapons bans are overturned. So proceed, number one, with the Commonwealth's taxpayers and their wallets in mind. Number two, with the jurisprudence not only in the Heller case, but also out of Benitez rulings in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in California that say that magazine capacity bans are unconstitutional. Understand the law and bring a fat wallet, and know that you may today, instead of banning these weapons that you're so intimidated by because you fail to understand them, in fact, ensure the ability of Americans to possess them from heretofore. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
My name is David Adams. I represent the Virginia Shooting Sports Association, the state affiliate of the NRA. We have thousands of individual members across the Commonwealth, as well as 26 affiliated shooting ranges and shooting clubs in the Commonwealth. This bill would decimate our most popular shooting discipline program, which is rifle shooting, not only for adults but for youth. Why would a youth get involved in a program if they can't buy the firearm they've been using in the program in the future? I urge you to defeat this bill. It's unconstitutional and will infringe on the rights of all of our members and other gun owners in Virginia.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome.
Philip Van Cleve, President of the Virginia Citizens Defense League. I think Secretary Moran, in a Freudian slip, said this is a gun prevention bill, and I think that's what it is. There is not any redeeming features I can find in the bill, nothing much to save. And by the way, the Virginia Tech Commission, after the Virginia Tech shooting, said having 10-round magazines, if Cho had had those, it would have made no difference. The gun bans would be unconstitutional. We strongly oppose this.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
I'm sorry.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you, sir. My name is Richard Pyle. I'm a citizen of Dinwiddie County. I'm not here because I want to keep my guns. I long for a day when I can put away my guns without fear of my fellow man. Yes, I enjoy shooting. I enjoy the challenge of marksmanship. I enjoy the competition of it. If I thought that lives would be saved by a utopian dream realized by me giving up my firearms, I would gladly do so. You speak of this mandate by the voters. You speak of this grand idea of removing guns from our streets. You speak of this after having watched nearly every major city in America try these very same laws only to reap higher crime and innocent blood. If this was a mandate, then where were the tens of thousands of your supporters? The polls, yes, they voted. But who were they? Brainwashed urbanites with nothing to change their opinion but Bloomberg television. I was one of more than 25,000 people who arrived on your doorstep when you first threatened us with these draconian laws. We knew...
Can you wrap up, sir?
Sir, I respectfully I'm disinclined to yield right now.
Okay.
We knew that there were risks, that there could be violence, but we came regardless. We came because we believe in our cause. We were willing to put ourselves at risk for our cause.
All right, sir, if you don't wrap up, I'm going to have to ask you to leave.
Respectfully, sir, this is the last thing I'll say.
Make it quick.
If you love wealth better than liberty, the tranquility of servitude better than the animating contest of freedom, go home from us in peace. We ask not your council of arms. Crouch down and lick the hand which feeds you. May your chains set lightly upon you, and may posterity ever forget that you were our countrymen.
Thank you so much. Now, I'm sorry. I do want to hear from you, your representative from I believe the industry.
Yes,
and
sir.
so I will give you 30 seconds.
Thank you very much.
Please, everyone else, I'm sorry, we're not going to be able to get to you. Time has expired, but I did want to hear from
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. My name is Knox Williams. I'm with the American Suppressor Association. We submitted extensive written testimony, and I believe I've met with every member or your staff. It's important to note that a silencer or suppressor, call it what you will, they're the same thing. The quietus is still louder than a jackhammer striking concrete. These are the most heavily regulated firearm accessory in the country and have been so since 1934. The ATF maintains a strict federal registry of every suppressor in lawful hands, including over 75,000 here in the state of Virginia. A direct quote from ATF, who governs them, is, quote, "Suppressors should not be viewed as a threat to public safety," end quote. The National Hearing Conservation Association also supports them as a method to help protect people's hearing by reducing dangerous noise levels.
Thank you.
For those reasons, we ask you to oppose this.
Thank you. I'm sorry, time has expired. I'm not going to be able to get to you. If you support this, or rather oppose this bill, please raise your hand. Great. Thank you very much. Now, I'll turn it over to the committee. Thank you all for your testimony. Delegate Rush, you are recognized, and we'd like to put 5 minutes on the time keep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question for the patron, please. Or maybe a couple, is that okay?
Delegate?
Yeah, hey, thank you. Delegate Levine, are you familiar with D.C. versus Heller, the Supreme Court decision?
I am. I'm also familiar with the Fourth Circuit, the First Circuit, Second Circuit, Third Circuit, Fourth Circuit, and D.C. Circuit that have upheld bans far more restrictive than this legislation.
Thank you. Are you familiar with in the Heller versus D.C., the common use of firearms in common control?
I am aware the United States Supreme Court finds bills like this constitutional. And if the gentleman has a problem with the United States Supreme Court, obviously you can take it up with them, but that's not my decision. This bill's constitutional.
Delegate Davis, you're recognized.
Mr. Chairman.
Oh. Delegate Davis.
Thank you. Delegate, can you please tell me the purpose of a muzzle brake or a compensator?
All of these features are designed in the federal. They come from the federal assault weapons ban, which, as I mentioned, decreased mass murders by 70%.
I understand, but
so what they're doing is these are features that have been vetted by all the experts, including the governor and the governor's staff.
I understand, Delegate. Can you tell me what the purposes of a muzzle brake is, please?
One's designed to keep the muzzle from going up, and the other's designed to prevent the recoil.
Mr. Chairman, is this the time for speaking to the bill or no?
Delegate Rush, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you said this does not prevent if you already have the weapon or the firearm at the current time. Would I be able to sell that?
After January 1st, 2021, you could not sell the weapon. There are limited transfers allowed.
Does the state of Virginia plan on compensating folks who've now lost value of their legally owned possession?
Since you can keep your gun, I do not believe you've lost value to it. Plus, of course, you can sell it prior to January 1st, 2021. That's certainly allowed.
Delegate Wilt, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Speaking to the bill.
Delegate Wilt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee, and audience. So this is a very passionate issue, and been a lot of testimony shared here, but one thing that I do want to make note of, in the Secretary's comments, he cited the tragedy at Virginia Tech. Truly was a tragedy and we've learned a lot of lessons from there. But one commonality between that and some of the other areas that he mentioned was the issue of gun-free zones. And Mr. Chairman, these are basically killing grounds. They're loaded. Mr. Chairman, if you're an individual, we cannot legislate morality, and we cannot stop evil. What we've done in those gun-free zones is created a target area for some insane person, purposely or under some medical problems or so forth, that truly needs to get help. But we've created situations. Those are easy targets. They're not going to go where an armed citizen is there to protect themselves. And I would cite also that instructor that was behind that door, that if he were able to be armed instead of being in a gun-free zone, perhaps he could have gone, when that individual was reloading, he could have gone out, taken out that perpetrator, and saved some of the other lives in the building. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Delegate Rasool.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a quick question for the gentleman from industry. I'm sorry I didn't catch your name.
Knox.
Yes, sir.
Mr.
My name is Knox Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Knox, just a quick question. You brought up some good points. As we know, of course, this is the legislative process is very long. There will continue to be conversations, and bills evolve over time. We're committee, things cross over, go to the governor. So this is a long process as we try to make sure we get things right. But specifically to your point, just can you clarify what you had said earlier about the silencers piece of that? You're saying that it's very heavily regulated right now, and I guess what you're advocating for is that as the process evolves, for us to take a harder look at the silencer piece to ensure that we account for that it's currently heavily regulated?
Sure. So our position is essentially that these have been heavily federally regulated since 1934, and that those federal regulations are more than exhaustive, that additional state-level regulations should not be imposed upon suppressors.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And
Thank you, Delegate Rasool. Delegate Wright.
Mr. Chairman, speaking to the bill,
You're recognized,
it
Delegate
was
Wright.
stated earlier that there were no need for these type weapons. All you need to do is look around at what's happening in our country, the attacks upon innocent individuals. We have the right to protect ourselves, and it seems like to me that really the goal is to remove all guns, and then what's going to be the source of protection for the homeowner when their family is under attack? There are shooting in churches. Recently, there's been an example of a person who was on duty there as a guard, and they were able to take care of the persons that came in to attack citizens because he was armed. And I think it's very important to understand this is a constitutional right that we have, and the courts have ruled that we have a right to have them. And I think it's an abomination for this General Assembly and this committee to pass bills that will take away our constitutional rights. We do have a need for these weapons. We do have a need and a right to protect ourselves, and I think that that's one of the most important rights that we have in the Constitution is the Second Amendment right. Second Amendment, and I think it's something we need to uphold. Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Bourne. Delegate Bourne, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, it has been said over and over again that these are sporting rifles, that they're not going to do anything. It has even been suggested that what happened at Virginia Tech or any other school was because it was a gun-free zone. But let's be very, very, very clear. I would remind everyone about the tragedy in Dayton, where a gunman, armed with a legally purchased military assault rifle, was killed in 30 seconds. But guess what? Because he had one of these weapons we are addressing today, 9 people are dead in 30 seconds. These guns were never, ever designed for civilian use. They are military assault rifles designed to kill as many people as possible. And so, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, I would move the pending question.
Substitute motion. Move to lay on the table.
We got a motion to lay on the table, properly seconded. This is non-debatable to lay on the table for those that are in the audience and members on the committee. This means to defeat the bill. So the motion is to lay on the table. Please vote on the electronic voting board. Levine?
Oh, I vote no.
Levine votes no. Lay on the table fails 12-9. I've got a motion to report and a properly second. Please vote on the electronic voting board. You've already made the substitute motion. We're loading up the motion to report with substitute. Members, please vote. Clerk will close the roll. Bill reports with substitute 12-9. Thank you, Delegate Levine. Committee will be at ease. Committee's at ease. The committee will come to order. Agenda is House Bill 1080, and that is my bill, and so I will hand the gavel to our Vice Chair, Delegate Bourne.
Everybody's out? Media's okay. Media? Yeah. Media? Yeah. So no other agencies? No. All right, no agencies, only media. No agencies, only media. What bill is it? Oh, 1080. Committee members, before us, we have House Bill 1080. Delegate Hope.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. House Bill 1080 that's before you. This is at the request of the Attorney General, and I'm sorry that they had to leave to testify, but they do support the bill. House Bill 1080 is a bill that expressly clarifies that no school board may authorize or designate any person to possess a firearm on school property other than those person expressly authorized by statute. The bill also clarifies that there's no exemption exists for special conservator of the peace to possess a firearm or other weapon on school property. Currently, Virginia law already bars special conservators of the peace from bringing guns onto schools. Last year, at least one school system was attempting to find a workaround that would have allowed more guns into schools. House Bill 1080 will make it clear that only trained, qualified law enforcement personnel may have guns for security purposes. The law also provides several options for employing armed security personnel with full enforcement training, but the law doesn't allow for arming of unqualified personnel, and for good reason. The introduction of unqualified personnel with guns raises the likelihood of a tragic accident or potentially catastrophic confusion during an emergency. The issue has come up over the years of whether we should arm school teachers or not. That bill has come up for the last 6 years, and the General Assembly has rejected that notion, and so this bill would make that clear as well. That's the bill before you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions from the committee members? And please raise your hand because I don't have the request to speak on my screen. Seeing none? Oh, Delegate Wright? Yeah, I don't have the thing that tells me you want.
Okay.
Delegate Wright.
Yes. My question is, if the local county and that school board sees that there are significant problems that needs to be addressed where the students and the personnel are protected, and they can have people that are highly qualified that may not be covered under statute, why would the state want to tell them that they don't have the ability? They're the local officials, local elected officials, and here the state is coming in, heavy hand of government again is coming in and telling them that we know what is best for you, and we're not going to allow you to protect the children in the best way you see fit. We've just got through discussing the terrible school tragedies that we've had. There's no question that's true. It holds true in schools and churches and shopping malls and whatever. And the saying is the only way to stop a bad person with a gun is a good person with a gun. But I think when we restrict the qualified people that may not be covered in statute from helping to protect our children and our churches and whatever else, I think we're making a big mistake, and I just want to make that point.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, that reminds me of a joke about doctor. But Delegate Hope, so we recently, and I believe you supported the passage of the bill that allowed local ordinances for firearm control. I'd ask a two-part question, possibly. Would this, with this local ordinance, if it became law, which I hope it doesn't, would this allow local school board or local boards of supervisors or city councils to enact an ordinance that would allow folks maybe to arm well-qualified trained teachers?
Well, to answer that question, of course, anything that we pass would supersede that. State law would oversee that, and that's really what we're trying to say. In current law, there is opportunities for school divisions to hire well-qualified, fully trained professionals for law enforcement. This just simply says that if they're not fully trained, they're not highly qualified, they cannot be hired. And this just makes that clear. That's how we currently operate. That's how we currently see things. And this just makes that abundantly clear.
And so the one follow-up, do you feel like that this is in conflict with the local control that we wanted to give on things you liked, and then on maybe policies you don't like, we don't want local control? Would that be a fair
Mr. Chairman, our staff attorney has an answer to that question.
Mr. Chair, and Delegate Rush, I believe that the language in the 22.1 to 80.2:4 section provides that it's expressly authorized by statute. So statute, I think, would be interpreted meaning as a provision of the code rather than a local ordinance. So anything the locality done is by local ordinance, which would not be affected by this bill.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Rush.
Maybe just a statement. Yeah, I understand the legalese. I'm talking about philosophically.
I know what you're talking about.
Okay, all right. I would thank the staff attorney and the chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question for the chairman. So to be absolutely clear, what we're doing here is prohibiting me. I have a properly stored firearm in my vehicle, and I'm going to drive to the school to pick up my child, that I cannot do that if this legislation is passed?
Mr. Chairman, I think there's already law that already dictates that. This just says that if a school board wants to arm teachers or arm anyone else who is not fully trained, they're prohibited from doing so.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I guess I want to go back to what you just said. Would you repeat what you just said about that last section?
Sure, and I'll try and repeat it as best I can. The last section provides that essentially no school board can authorize or designate any person to possess a firearm on school property other than those persons expressly authorized by statute. So if the code provides an exception for someone to possess a firearm on school property, that will remain. So basically, it lays out the concept that only the General Assembly can authorize persons having a firearm on school, which there are several exceptions both within the other section that's being amended in this bill, 18.2-308.1, as well as there is another code section in 22.1 dealing with school security officers, school security officers, which allows them to carry firearms as well. So unless it's authorized by the code, which is when the General Assembly acts, people cannot possess firearms within schools.
Follow-up question?
Delegate Robinson.
Just for clarification, then, if a school district has teachers go through major extensive training, they still would not be allowed to carry on school property under this change.
Mr. Chair, Delegate Robinson, I believe that's correct, and I believe that's the intent of the bill.
That's correct.
Anyone else? Seeing none. It's been moved and properly seconded to report House Bill 1080. The clerk will open the roll. Members will cast their vote. Clerk will close the roll. That bill reports by a vote of 11-7.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the committee. That completes our docket for
Mr.
the
Chairman?
year. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, if I might.
Delegate Bourne.
As we all know, these issues are extremely sensitive, and people are passionate on both sides. But I think we would all be remiss if we did not thank Colonel Pike and his staff for handling what could have been a bad situation with class, dignity, grace, and professionalism.
No, thank you, and I second that. And so that unless there's anything else that anyone wants to say, this completes our business till crossover. So meeting is adjourned.